Hello and welcome back to Newtonian. In today's lecture, what we're going to be studying is water. Now, what's cool about water is none of us would be alive without water. Yet every day we use it, we drink it, we see it, we go to the beach, but we never think about the actual chemical structure behind it or why it is so useful. What makes it so useful? Why is it a key part of plants, animals, and an essential part of our life? What's so important about it? What's so special? So in today's lecture, that's what we're going to try and find out. This lecture is based on the OCR spec mainly. However, this does apply to a lot of specs and you should check your specification and see what points are relevant to you. Let's crack on. So the first thing that we really want to look at is how water actually looks. So what's our actual chemical structure? So let's have our oxygen here, okay? So we've got our oxygen here. Now our oxygen will form two covalent bonds, okay? Now when it's forming two covalent bonds, in water, we have hydrogen as well and oxygen. So we know our oxygen is forming two covalent bonds, so 1, 2. And what are the two other elements in water? You've got two hydrogens. So one hydrogen is there and one hydrogen is there. So collectively, we can see two hydrogens, one oxygen, so H2O is our chemical formula. Perfect. Now, what's so special about this molecule here? Now, let's draw this out in big here. Okay. Here is our H2O molecule. Now, to understand why this is so special, we're going to introduce you to Mr. Oxygen. Now, here's Mr. Oxygen. Now, he's Mr. Oxygen, okay? And underneath him, we've got Mr. Hydrogen, okay? We've got these two guys. Now, what's different about these two is how strong they are. Now, Mr. Oxygen always works out, and he's got strong muscles. Okay. This is Mr. Oxygen. Okay. Now, whereas Mr. Hydrogen's a bit of a weakling, so what he has is very thin arms, very weak arms. Right. So Mr. Oxygen's very strong. Mr. Hydrogen's very weak. And what they like to what they have between each other is a bottle of perfume. Okay? Now I know you'll be like, why is he talking about perfume? Bear with me. So they've got this brand new bottle of perfume. Okay. Now both of them want to apply it on them. Now what's so special about this perfume bottle is that you can smell the actual perfume from inside without having sprayed it. Now here's our perfume bottle, and this perfume bottle, the name of it is called Electron. Electrons, okay? That's the brand name, okay? So you've got like, I don't know, some perfume. This perfume's called Electrons. Now, they both want it. Now you've got Mr. Oxygen and Mr. Hydrogen. They both are pulling at it. They both are pulling at the perfume, electron perfume, but only one can, I suppose, take it further to themselves. And Mr. Oxygen's clearly going to win, right? He's got bigger muscles, so he's pulling it from hydrogen, and it's closer to him. So the perfume bottle is just about there, whereas for Mr. Hydrogen, the perfume bottle is all the way over there. So let's draw this out here. So we've got Mr. Oxygen here, we've got Mr. Hydrogen here, and we've got our electrons. Our electron perfume bottle is being pulled closer towards Mr. Oxygen, so we can say electron. Electron is closer for both of these hydrogens. The electron is closer to the oxygen. Agreed? So, perfect. So Mr. Oxygen's got control over those electrons. Now, we said that this perfume bottle here, we can smell it without having sprayed it. And what's interesting here is, because the oxygen has more of these electrons towards itself, which one do you think will be better smelling, Mr. Hydrogen or Mr. Oxygen? Of course, you'll be like, there's more smell coming from where Mr. Oxygen is. So that's why we will say Mr. Oxygen is better smelling. And you're like, this is weird. Where am I going to? All these electrons, we learned at GCSE physics. Electrons our lovely electrons are negatively charged. Okay, so if we've got our electrons which are negatively charged, and if Mr. Oxygen has more of these towards itself, what does that make oxygen? Does it make it negatively charged? No, because Mr. Oxygen doesn't solely have that perfume to himself. He still has Mr. Hydrogen trying to pull it away, right? So Mr. Oxygen doesn't have complete control. Because Mr. Oxygen doesn't have complete control, we can't say Mr. Oxygen is negatively charged. But we can still say he's more negatively charged than hydrogen is. Which is why we come to a very important term. What we instead call Mr. Oxygen to be is we call him to be partially charged. Mr. Oxygen, in fact, is partially charged. And what charge does Mr. Oxygen have? He's got more electrons to himself because electrons are negatively charged. Mr. Oxygen is also partially negatively charged. Now, for partially charged, because science likes to overcomplicate things, we've got a symbol for partially charged. So a symbol for partially charged is this. This symbol here stands for partially charged, right? So when I put a negative sign next to it, it means partially negative. In other words, I can put this symbol here, and that means oxygen is partially negative. And if I put that symbol here, I must say hydrogen is partially positive. Now you can imagine negative to be very nice smelling, sweet smelling, whereas positive to be this putrid stench, okay? So if Mr. Oxygen's got all of those perfume electrons towards himself, he'll be smelling good, sweet and good. Whereas Mr. Hydrogen, he's got less of that perfume next to him, which means that he'll be smelling much more worse. And if he's smelling much more worse, in other words, he's got less electrons, he will be partially positive. This means our actual molecule, it's got a whole load of charges acting in it. We've got our hydrogens, which are partially positive, and our oxygens partially negative. Now, one thing you need to remember is positive attracts negative, correct? So that means if something negative decides to come along here, right, my hydrogen will be like, hey, there's a negative, I can smell better. Why shouldn't I pull it close to myself? So the hydrogen will try and attract the negative charge. But what's a bit weird is, if we've got a positive charge here, our Mr. Oxygen will also try and attract it because positive and negative attract to one another. So we can kind of see what's going on there with our molecule. So parts of our molecule will attract negative, in other words, our hydrogens, whereas our oxygen will attract positive. So that's our molecule attracting different things from different parts. Perfect. Now, what we want to move on to is what's the properties of water? What exactly are the properties that make it so special? We've understood that water is charged, partially charged, but what does that give the water molecule? What does it give water on the whole? Perfect. So now let's go on to properties of water. Now, what's the first property? Well, the first property of water is a high boiling point. The first beneficial property of water is a high boiling point. The next one is a high specific heat capacity. Is high specific heat capacity. We'll go over all of these later in more depth in this lecture, okay? The next one is cohesive. Water is cohesive. The next property we need to know is water is adhesive. As I say, I will go through each term individually, explaining each and explaining the application in biology of it. The next one we want to know is a high latent heat. Water has a high latent heat. Next one we need to know is water is a good solvent. Water is a good solvent. The final property that we need to know is that water is incompressible. Okay, so it is incompressible. So these are the different properties we need to know, and I need you guys to know these off by heart. First property, high boiling point. Second property, high specific heat capacity. Third property, water is cohesive. Fourth property, water is adhesive. Fifth property, water has a high latent heat capacity. Sixth property, water is a good solvent. And final property I need you guys to know is water is incompressible. Oh, hang on. There's one more I need you guys to know. Sorry. My bad. Ice has a lower density than liquid water. Yeah, ice has a lower density than liquid water. That's the final property I need you guys to know for the specification. So now I'm going to flip the board over and we're going to go over why water has a high boiling point and what's the benefit in biology of water having a high boiling point. So now let's go over the property of water of why it has a high boiling point and what's the actual biological benefit of that. So to understand this, what I want you guys to imagine is we've got a glass of water here, okay? We've got some water here. Now, this water, what we do is we'll zoom into it, okay? We zoom into this water. Now, when we zoom into this water, we see a lot of H2O molecules. So let's just draw all of these H2O molecules out. Oxygen, hydrogen, oxygen, hydrogen. We've got a hydrogen there. We've got an oxygen there. We've got a hydrogen there. So you can see that we've got all of these different molecules here, okay, of water. Now, in between these molecules, because we came to the conclusion before that our molecules are partially charged. So we know, let's just put the partial charges before on here. So we've got our oxygen, it's partially negatively charged. Hydrogen partially positively charged, hydrogen partially positive, oxygen partially negative, hydrogen partially positive, oxygen partially negative, partially positive, partially positive, partially negative, partially positive. Okay, so we've got all of these different partial charges here. Now we've got our oxygen and hydrogen, okay? We've got essentially here a partially positive and a partially negative. Now, what do we know will happen between these two? Between these two, we will have attraction. Okay, we will have attraction, which means that our oxygen of one water molecule, if we say this is water molecule A and this is water molecule B, the water molecule A's oxygen will attract water molecule B's hydrogen, because one is partially negative, the oxygen partially negative, the hydrogen is partially positive, which means we've got a bond of attraction between these two, okay? This bond of attraction, you need to know, is known as a hydrogen bond. What is it known as? It is known as a hydrogen bond. Now, we've got these hydrogen bonds all around in between these water molecules. We've got another one here between this hydrogen and oxygen here, because one's partially positive, the other's partially negative. We've got another hydrogen bond here between this oxygen and hydrogen, and that's so on and so on, right? We've got more hydrogen bonds with other molecules. Okay, this pink should represent your hydrogen bond, okay? We've got more hydrogen bonds all around, that's fine, okay? Now we've got so many of these hydrogen bonds, right? We've got a lot of these, a lot. Now, if I've got a lot of these hydrogen bonds, what's going on? Well, these hydrogen bonds all require some energy to break, okay? So if I've got, for example, let's say a piece of wood, and I'm trying to break it, okay? I need to exert energy onto that piece of wood. I need to bend it very hard to break it. The same way, this hydrogen bond, when we want to break that hydrogen bond, we need to exert power, we need to exert energy, okay? And when we're exerting that energy, we need to break all of these different bonds. And when do we break these hydrogen bonds? Hang on. Well, we break hydrogen bonds whenever we're boiling water, okay? Whenever we're trying to boil water in our kitchen, we are always heating it up, right? And that energy is going nowhere but in our hydrogen bonds. So these hydrogen bonds are receiving all of this energy, okay? These hydrogen bonds receiving all this energy. Now, when they're receiving this energy, what's happening is this energy is trying to break these bonds up. Now, because there's a lot of bonds here, a lot of bonds require a lot of energy, okay? Even if one bond requires a small amount of energy, because we've got thousands and thousands of bonds, all of those bonds require small amounts, and the amounts of energy add up till it's crazy high, which is why our water has a high boiling point when we look at it collectively. In other words, we can now say water has a high boiling point because it has a lot of hydrogen bonds between all its molecules, hence a lot of energy has to be provided to break them all. Therefore, giving water a high boiling point. Okay, therefore giving water a high boiling point. So water has a high boiling point because it has a lot of hydrogen bonds between all its molecules. Hence, a lot of energy has to be put in to break them all. And therefore, because we're providing so much energy, which is in the form of heat, water has a high boiling point. Okay, which is 100 degrees Celsius, as we all know. Now, great, water's got a brilliantly high boiling point, but that's chemistry and physics. Where's the biology in this? We're studying biology, not physics and not chemistry. What's going on? Well, here we are. Why is this so beneficial? So let's imagine an aquarium, okay? I'm going to draw an aquarium here. Let's take some like this. Okay, let's draw an aquarium. So all of this is our water. Now in this aquarium, who's swimming? Well, in this aquarium, we've got Mr. Fishy. Okay, Mr. Fishy is here. Mr. Fishy is swimming in this aquarium. Okay, he's got all of this seaweed here. He's having a beautiful time. Okay, now we've got this supervillain. Okay, now this supervillain, he's very mean. He doesn't like Mr. Fishy. Now what he does is he tries to kill Mr. Fishy. He thinks that he's smart. He puts a light here, right? Or a heat source, okay? A heat source. Now this heat source is sending heat towards Mr. Fishy's water. Now, Mr. Fishy panics. He looks at the heat source. He thinks, oh my God, my water's going to become steam very quickly, okay? My water is going to become steam very quickly, and then I won't have any water to swim in. And if I don't have any water to swim in, I will die. Okay, that's a problem. Biology doesn't like that. Evolution doesn't like that. So what's the solution here? What Mr. Villain doesn't know is that Mr. Fishy's in water, and water has a lot of hydrogen bonds. So what is happening here is Mr. Villain's heat source, it needs to provide a lot of energy to the water. But before all of that energy can be provided, Mr. Superman, he comes and tries to save him. Okay? Now, if this water had very little amount of hydrogen bonds, then this heat source would evaporate all of that water into steam very quickly, and Mr. Fishy would die. But because there's so many hydrogen bonds here, Mr. Fishy doesn't die, because it takes a long time and a lot of energy to actually heat up the water. And before that can happen, Mr. Superman comes and switches off the light source. And you're like, okay, that's absolute nonsense. Well, how does that relate to real life? Well, now I want you guys to imagine a river or a lake, let's imagine, okay? Let's imagine a lake here. Now in this lake, we've got a lot of aquatic organisms, okay? All of them are having a good time here. Okay. Now, one day, suddenly, we've got our sun up here. Mr. Sun decides to become a bit hotter for the day, and he's beating down on the water. Okay. Now, if the water didn't have a very high boiling point, if the water didn't have a very high boiling point, this lake would run dry very quickly. And if the lake runs dry or the oceans run dry, then you don't have any aquatic organisms that can actually survive there. So why is it important for water to have had a high boiling point? Because without that, aquatic organisms could not survive, because their habitat would be non-existent. So that's why it's so important water has a high boiling point. And now we've covered why it has such a high boiling point. A lot of hydrogen bonds. Because a lot of hydrogen bonds have to be broken, a lot of energy has to be supplied. A lot of energy has to be supplied. In other words, that means a lot of thermal energy. Thermal energy means heat. A lot of heat means a high boiling point. High boiling point means water will not suddenly evaporate from our seas or lakes, and therefore our aquatic organisms have a good time and they're happy and they can survive. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to now just turn over the board again and we'll go to the next property. Now we're on to the next property. The next property of water that we're going to look into is the idea that water has a high specific heat capacity. Now, what's meant by high specific heat capacity? Well, let's first define the term. Specific heat capacity. Now, this is a term that we learnt during GCSE physics, and for all of you who are doing A-level physics, you're going to come across this again in thermal physics in year 13. So don't worry. Well, how do we define it? Well, specific heat capacity is the energy required to raise the temperature of 1 kg of a substance by 1 degree Celsius. So it is the energy that is required to raise the temperature of a substance, 1 kilogram of a substance, by 1 degree Celsius. Okay, we understand that? Perfect. So what's meant by a high specific heat capacity? A high specific heat capacity is that the energy that is required to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of a substance by 1 degree Celsius is a lot. A lot of energy is required. Perfect. So that means water requires a lot of energy to raise 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius. In other words, water's got a high specific heat capacity. Perfect. So now we understand what specific heat capacity means. But wait, hang on. Why does water have a high specific heat capacity? Well, let's go back to our little diagram. So in this corner, what we'll have is we've got an oxygen molecule. We've got oxygen, and we've got 2 hydrogens. So we've got a lovely water molecule. Underneath here, we'll have another oxygen, we'll have a hydrogen, we'll have an oxygen, we'll have hydrogen, we'll have an oxygen here, we'll have a hydrogen here, oxygen here, hydrogen there. Okay, that should perfect. And now we know that there are partial charges. So oxygen is partially negative. Hydrogen is partially positive, hydrogen is partially positive, partially positive, partially positive, partially positive, partially positive. Oxygen, partially negative, partially negative, partially negative. Brilliant. Now we have hydrogen bonds between the partially positive and the partial negatives. So between the oxygens and the hydrogens, we've got these hydrogen bonds. Okay. So and so. Now, perfect. We understand this diagram. We need you to know this off by heart. You need to know this diagram when I refer to it, okay? Now, the next thing that I need you to know before I go on is that temperature, if I define temperature of, let's say, a liquid, temperature is essentially the kinetic energy of all the particles in that liquid. So if I've got, let's say, this water here, right? This water, the temperature of this water will be determined by the kinetic energy of these molecules. Now, what does kinetic energy mean? Okay, let's go back to GCSE physics. Kinetic energy means the energy when something's moving. If there's a high kinetic energy or a high temperature, what does high kinetic energy mean? High kinetic energy must mean it's moving faster, because kinetic energy is to do with movement. In other words, at a high temperature, you will have your molecules moving around very fast because they have a high kinetic energy. Okay, now we understand that. Let's move on, because now we can understand this in a bit more depth. Okay, so if I want to have a high temperature, if I want to raise the temperature, I need my particles, my molecules, to move faster. If I want to raise the temperature by 1 degree Celsius, these particles, these molecules have to move faster. They have to have higher kinetic energy. Okay? Now, here's the problem. I have some heat, okay? I supply my heat to these molecules, to this water. I'm supplying heat from everywhere. Now, this heat doesn't first actually go into the kinetic energy of these molecules. Where does it go then? Well, this thermal energy, this thermal energy from the heat doesn't go to the kinetic energy. Instead, where it goes is to these hydrogen bonds. This energy goes into those hydrogen bonds. It pulls them apart, right? It tries to break them. And because, as we learned before, there are so many hydrogen bonds. That means we have to provide a lot of energy. We have to provide a lot of energy before the energy is being provided to the kinetic energy, which means that the energy from heat, the thermal energy, is being transferred to two recipients. The first recipient is our hydrogen bond. To break it. The second place that this energy is going is in fact, it's going to kinetic energy. Now, if it's going to kinetic energy, the second one, that means the temperature is going to increase. Now, here's the issue. If the energy, the thermal energy, was only going to kinetic energy, then the temperature would increase very quickly. But because it's going to two different sources, the energy, that means that the temperature cannot increase that quickly. In other words, a lot of energy has to be provided to increase the temperature of 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius. In other words, water requires a lot of energy and hence has a high specific heat capacity. Now you're like, okay, yeah, you've lectured me on that, but what's the point of this? Where's the biology in this? And that's where I come in. So, how does this actually help in biology? Well, let's think about it. If I've got water, okay, let's go back to an aquarium example, okay? Here's our aquarium. We've got a whole load of water. Okay, now we've got Mr. Fishy in here. Mr. Fishy's having a good time. Now Mr. Fishy has a lot of enzymes in him, okay? Mr. Fishy has a lot of enzymes. And I know you guys haven't gone over the enzyme chapter, but try and follow on, okay? Enzymes have to have a certain temperature at which they're happy. For example, in your house, you might want to have the temperature at 20 degrees Celsius because that's when you're happy, you're comfortable. But maybe your brother or sister, they feel too warm at that temperature and they're like, no, we need it at 18 degrees Celsius. That means you both have different optimum temperatures. And let's say, for example, your brother or sister, they go and turn the temperature down to 18. They're like, oh my God, it's too cold. I can't do anything. I don't want to get out of my bed. In other words, your actual efficiency, your actual will to do something is reduced. The same way these enzymes are very picky about this stuff. Okay? They need a specific temperature to function at their optimum. If it's too high, they simply can't function. They'll break apart, they'll become denatured. Denatured is a key term. Mention it, you get marks. Okay? Denatured. I'll write that down. Yeah. Just mention it in this context. You'll go over this in enzymes much more. But for now, I'll just write this. If you want to look it up, go for it, okay? It will get you marks this time. But anyways, those enzymes, too high, too low, denaturing's a problem. The will of those enzymes to do anything just reduces. The enzymes are like little picky kids, okay? They need everything perfect. If they don't get what they want, they won't do what they need to do, okay? Now, let's say Mr. Sun, or Mrs. Sun for this fact, Mrs. Sun is having a bad day today. Mrs. Sun's like, let's put a lot of heat out. The anger's coming out. Mrs. Sun's angry with Mr. Sun. So what she does is she sends out all of these rays. She becomes a lot more angrier and a lot more hotter here. Okay, so now all of these rays are coming to the water. It's absorbing all of it. But because this thermal energy, okay, this energy coming from the sun, this thermal energy is distributed to two sources. Hydrogen bonds breaking kinetic energy. Because it's being distributed to two, not all of this energy from the sun will go to the temperature. In other words, because water will require a lot of energy to increase the temperature by even 1 degree Celsius, the sun's heat, the sun's thermal energy isn't able to raise the temperature of this water by a lot of degrees. Maybe half a degree, 0.1 degree, but it's not by a lot. And that means Mr. Enzyme are able to stay at their optimum temperature, and hence are not denatured and can perform their function. Okay, let's recap this. Why does water have a high specific heat capacity? Water's got a high specific heat capacity because it's got a whole lot of hydrogen bonds. And because it's got a whole lot of hydrogen bonds, when I'm providing heat, thermal energy, that energy, some of it's going to those hydrogen bonds to try and break them, okay? It's trying to break them apart. And some of it, the rest of it, will go to the kinetic energy. And that means it's going to try and increase the temperature. In other words, not all of your energy that you're providing as heat is going to the temperature. Only some of it is. The more it goes to the hydrogen bonds, the less it can go to the temperature. Okay? So a high specific heat capacity means that there's a lot of hydrogen bonds to break up. In other words, there's a lot less going towards the temperature. A lot less thermal energy is going towards the temperature. In other words, the temperature is not going to increase by a lot when you provide some energy to them. Okay? And this is beneficial to biological life because it means that the temperature of water will remain relatively constant even if there are fluctuations in the environment. Even if suddenly the sun suddenly decides to get angry and throws out a lot more heat, there will be a bit of a change in the temperature, but 0.1 degrees here and there. And that's why a lot of the times in the news, you hear the water in the sea is going to rise by 1 degree Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius. We're like, wait, that doesn't sound like a lot. And yeah, you're right, the temperature doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a lot of energy going into the ocean. Okay, that's a lot of energy because water has a high specific heat capacity. So in an exam question, if you are asked, what is a property of water? High specific heat capacity. What's the benefit of it? The benefit is it allows for aquatic organisms, to have their enzymes remaining at their optimum temperature because when heat is provided to the water, the temperature does not increase by a lot. The temperature remains relatively constant during small environmental changes. Okay? So that's what I want you guys to write an exam question. Just keep repeating this, okay? Just go in the lecture, understand it, and repeat. Right? You can do exam question, that's fine. But you need to know what's going on here. You need to know exactly why things are happening. You need to know the science behind it. A lot of people will just memorize biology, will memorize the fact that, okay, water's got a high specific heat capacity. Brilliant. Why am I spending such a long time lecturing on this? Because you need to know why. If you don't know why, you cannot apply things in biology. Application comes from knowing why, not from memorizing, not from doing exam questions. You need to know why things are the way they are. Okay, then we proceed forwards. Okay, next we're going to go on to the next property, which is about cohesion in water. I'm going to just flip over the board now. Okay, so let's just flip that over. Okay, so the next property we're going to talk about is cohesion. So what exactly is cohesion? We've sometimes come across the term of cohesion in, for example, team building exercises, where they're like, we as a team need to be cohesive with each other. But what does it mean? What does that exactly mean? It means to stick together. But not anything just sticks together. It needs to be the same thing sticks together. And that's where you have the word co, right? Co, everyone together. And everyone's working together, essentially. And everyone's the same here. So, as a definition of cohesion, what you need to remember is that like things, the same thing will attract the same thing. Seems weird, but trust me, it's fine. Water attracts water. That means water is cohesive. Simple as that. Why does water attract water? Well, you remember, you've got your partially negative charge here on your oxygen, and you've got a partially positive charge here on the hydrogen of the next molecule. If that's true, you've got two different charges, two opposite charges. What do two opposite charges do? Well, I remember two opposite charges, they attract, right? So these two opposite charges will attract one another. In other words, these two molecules will attract each other. They will come towards each other. Okay, so if I pull this molecule, I'm pulling it this way, right? That will mean that this molecule will also be pulled that way, because your hydrogen and oxygen of two different molecules will be attracting each other. In other words, your water molecules are cohesive. Water is cohesive by definition. Okay, what does cohesion mean? Cohesion means the same thing attracts the same thing. And in this case, water molecules attract water molecules. Simple as. Now, what about in biology? What's really going on? Why is cohesion so important? Well, let's go to the xylem. Right, we learned about the xylem at GCSE. We know that the xylem transports water. Okay, we know that this xylem transports water. Water will try and go upwards, right? Now we know water is going upwards. And why is it going upwards? That's because of the transpiration stream. You've come across transpiration at GCSE. That's in the transpiration stream is essentially the movement of water upwards. We'll go over that later on, so that you don't need to overcomplicate it. Just know that water's moving up because of the transpiration stream. But there's an issue here. So if my transpiration stream is pulling one molecule, okay, I'm pulling this transpiration stream, is pulling this molecule upwards, okay? But it's not pulling that molecule. So why will this molecule also go upwards? Why will all of the other molecules start to shift upwards? Only one molecule should technically go upwards. No, if there's no cohesion present in water. And that will essentially mean you're transporting one molecule by one molecule. That's not going to go anywhere. You are not going to supply water fast enough. This plant shouldn't be living if there was no cohesion in water. So how does cohesion help? Well, because these two molecules are attracting each other. When the transpiration stream pulls one molecule upwards, it will mean that the other molecules are attracted and will follow along. They will also be pulled, right? So if you imagine this is the hydrogen one, this is one water molecule, this is the other water molecule. Because this water molecule is being pulled by the transpiration stream, it's going to also pull this other molecule here up as well. And because this is happening with each water molecule, all of the water will move upwards. Right? Even the water right at the bottom coming from the roots. So all of that water is going upwards and upwards and upwards. Okay, we understand that, right? That is why cohesion is so important. Without cohesion, you will simply have one molecule by one molecule, then the next molecule, then the next molecule, then the next, and that's not going to go anywhere. Cohesion is true and is needed because water needs to be transported completely up the plant through the transpiration stream. The transpiration stream can only work when there is cohesion present. So, you have an exam question in front of you. It's asking you, why is cohesion important? Cohesion is important for the first reason, because in the xylem, you have the transpiration stream, which is pulling up the water, and because there is attraction between the water molecules, the water is able to travel up the transpiration stream in a continuous flow. In other words, not molecule by molecule. And hence it's beneficial. But there's more to the story. There's another function of cohesion, which is very important to know. So let's go to a lake. Okay. Now this lake here. Let's draw the water surface first. Okay. This lake has an inhabitant. He's called Mr. Insect. Now Mr. Insect realizes there's no home for him. There's no way he can sleep or walk past this river. But he's still able to. How? Why? Well, that's because of cohesion. Well, what you have here is all of these molecules. These molecules have these hydrogen bonds between each other. Okay. Now, I want you to imagine my hands are molecules, right? These are molecules. Okay. And my head is the insect. Okay. So now, when my head's resting on this hydrogen bond, if you see, my head's actually being supported, right, by these two molecules. Okay. So my head's being supported the same way. When the insect, it presses its foot down on the water very gently, since it's very small, guys. It's not massive, it's not heavy, nothing like that. When it presses its foot across the water surface, because similar to my head, you've got the hydrogen bonds between all of these water molecules, your insect is being supported. Because your insect's being supported, suddenly your insect's got a new home. Because that insect can walk over that water whenever it likes, it can stand on it, it can have fun. In other words, the insect has a habitat on the water. So your insect has a habitat on this water. So what are the two benefits of cohesion? The first benefit of cohesion is it allows for transpiration stream to occur, because all water molecules are pulled together, and hence there can be a continuous stream of water. The second benefit is that it provides a habitat on the water surface. It provides a habitat on the water surface. So that's what you need to know about cohesion. So the next property we're going to be dealing with is latent heat of vaporization. Now water's got a very high latent heat of vaporization. But before we go into water, what exactly does latent heat of vaporization actually mean? What in the world does it mean? Well, this is the definition. Now you've come across this at GCSE physics, but I'll still go over it, just to refresh it in your mind. So the definition states that the latent heat of vaporization is the energy transferred to cause for a change to occur from the liquid state to the gaseous state without the temperature changing. Now, let's simplify that down, for God's sake. It sounds so boring. Well, let's look at the first thing here. Okay, so without the temperature change. This seems like a very important line. What does it mean? It means that the temperature doesn't change. And we know, we related in the last section back, we related temperature to kinetic energy, right? So in other words, it means that the energy transferred to cause a change from liquid to gas without the kinetic energy changing. Okay, so the kinetic energy is staying the same. So where is the energy going that we're providing? Well. If you look back to the lecture, there are two places the energy can go. One place is the hydrogen bonds, to break these hydrogen bonds, and the other place is in the kinetic energy form. Now, if the thermal energy, the heat we provide, if it cannot go to kinetic energy, where can it go? Well, the only place it can really go is to our lovely hydrogen bonds. Okay, it can go to our hydrogen bonds. So essentially, latent heat of vaporization is the energy that is provided directly to these hydrogen bonds when the kinetic energy is not changing. Okay. So, what does a high latency of vaporization mean? Or, for the matter of fact, why does water have a high latent heat of vaporization? Why does water require a lot of energy to change state from liquid to gas without the temperature changing? Why is a lot of energy required? Well, let's go back to the chemical structure. As I say, chemical structure is what's guiding us in all of this, okay? We've got our oxygen, we've got our hydrogen, we've got our hydrogen, partially positive, partially negative, partially positive, okay? Lovely, we've got another oxygen here, hydrogen there, partially negative, partially positive, partially negative. Another water molecule here, hydrogen there, partially negative, partially positive. Brilliant. Now we know that there are hydrogen bonds. Lovely hydrogen bonds here. Okay, we've got hydrogen bonds. We've got a lot of hydrogen bonds. In water, you have a lot of water molecules, as you can think, right? There's a lot of them there. And that means you've got a lot of hydrogen bonds. You've got a lot of hydrogen bonds that require energy. And if that's true, that means a lot of hydrogen bonds are going to be broken. They need to be broken. That means a lot of energy has to be transferred. If a lot of energy has to be transferred to break all of the hydrogen bonds, which is when you have a state change from liquid to gas, you need a lot of energy. If you need a lot of energy, according to this definition, the latent heat of vaporization of water should also be high, right? As simple as that. You have a lot of hydrogen bonds that need to be broken so that we can go from liquid to gas. That means you need to provide a lot of energy when the temperature is not changing. So if I'm providing a lot of energy to the water, what does that mean? Well, all that means is the latent heat of vaporization is very high. If you're like, fine, okay, yeah, that's fine. But hang on. How does that relate to biology? That's where I come in. So the way I want you to think about this is, okay. So you're on a summer's day, okay? You decide that you've had enough with life. You want to have a fun and fit life. So you go on a run, okay? And you suddenly have very muscular arms as well. So let's draw your arm out here, okay? Nice biceps, nice triceps here, lovely shoulders. Okay, this is you. You got lovely traps there. Okay, and you are running. Okay, you are running as fast as you can. Here's the problem. You are sweating as well, so you've got a whole layer of sweat forming on your skin. Okay. You've got a lot of sweat forming here. But why do you have sweat? What's the point? Why do we have water coming out of here? Why not something else? Why not mercury is coming out from here? Or let's say gold. Why isn't that coming out from here? Or why isn't something else coming from here? Why isn't, I don't know, a random element coming out of here? What's the specific reason that water's coming out? Why is water useful as sweat? What's the benefit? Okay, let's think about this. Okay, you got sweat on you. That sweat, your body's warming up, your muscles, your bicep here, your shoulders, your triceps, all are warming it up. What's going to happen to the water? The water's going to evaporate as water vapor, okay? Water vapor. This will become water vapor and will evaporate. Now, if it's evaporating, it needs to have gone from liquid to gas. In other words, energy must have been supplied to it. So energy from here, your muscles, has been taken away by the water. Okay. Now, what's the benefit of water having a high latent heat of vaporization? Now, the benefit is that water required a lot of energy to go from liquid to gas. So for your sweat to have gone from liquid to gas. It must have taken a lot of energy. If it's taking a lot of energy, it's removing a lot of that heat, a lot of that thermal energy from you. And if it's doing that, it's cooling you down. Do you get it? So your heat from your muscles is basically evaporating your water, your sweat, the water. And because it's got a high latent heat of vaporization, the sweat is able to remove a lot of energy from you, a lot of thermal energy from you. So you are less hot. Okay? We get that, right? So that's the benefit of a high latent heat of vaporization of water, because it allows for sweat to remove a lot of energy from you, a lot of thermal energy, which allows for you to maintain optimum temperature conditions inside of your body, which is homeostasis, and that's perfect, that's brilliant, that's what you want to happen. Right, so now we've covered why water is such a good thing for sweat, because it's got a high heat of vaporization. So let's go to the next one now. Okay, so the next property that we need to deal with is water being a good solvent. So why is water a good solvent, first of all? Well, we know water is polar. Water is a polar molecule, because here we can see partially positive, partially negative the oxygen. So water is a partially charged molecule, so to say. Now, what that means is that this water molecule, if we've got, for example, a substance, an ionic compound, that ionic compound has, say, positive charge here, and let's say a negative charge here. Now, what's going to happen is this positive charge is going to be attracted by this hydrogen here. This positive charged ion will be attracted by your oxygen here, right? So we're essentially splitting, we're breaking apart ionic compounds. Now, what's great about this is essentially your water is acting as a brilliant solvent. Okay, your water is acting as a great solvent. So now, what's the benefit of water acting as a good solvent? Why do I care? We need to. Because what are your cells made of? Well, let's just draw out a lovely cell. So we've got a cell here, okay? We've got a cell here. Now, most of our cell is made out of cytoplasm. Now, what does cytoplasm consist of? It consists of a lot of water. A lot of it is water. Cytoplasm contains a lot of water. The cytoplasm contains a lot of water. Now, the cytoplasm is where a lot of the chemical reactions of your cell take place. Now, if your water wasn't a good solvent, things wouldn't be able to dissolve in it, right? Your different ions wouldn't be able to react with each other, which is a massive problem. And that doesn't exist because water is a great solvent. Water is a great solvent. It comes here, the partially positive hydrogen is like, oh my god, there is a negative ion. Let me go grab it. It grabs it, pulls it towards itself. Then the oxygen, the partially negative oxygen on one of the water molecules, it looks ahead. It's like, oh, there's a positive charge there. Let me go get it. So he goes to the positively charged ion. He pulls the positively charged ion away and he breaks up the compound, the ionic compound. And this is happening all around. This means that these ions are free to react with one another. And therefore, you can have reactions occurring in the cytoplasm. Hence, the fact that water is a good solvent, it allows for chemical reactions to take place within the cell. Okay. What's the other benefit? There must be more to it. Yes, there is. And we come back to plants. So let's do this, okay? So we've got our phloem this time. I've had more than enough of our xylem. from that last example. So now we have our flow. Okay. This is our phloem. Now what goes up the phloem, up and down the phloem? We've got food. We've got assimilates, which are, I'll write the keyword here, assimilate. Assimilates are essentially just sugars, or you can call it plant food. Okay. They are traveling up your plant. Like, fine, what's the point? Well, the point is this. That if you've got food traveling up the plant, it must be suspended in some liquid. And the liquid all of these sugars, these different molecules are dissolved in is our good old water. Right? If our water wasn't a good solvent, these different foods, these different sugars would simply not dissolve. And if they wouldn't dissolve, you ain't getting any food traveling up that. Right? So you need your water to be a very good solvent. And that's why it helps. So that's the second usage of water as a good solvent. First usage, it allows for cellular reactions to take place within the cytoplasm of the cell. The second, it allows for substances to be dissolved in the phloem sap, i.e. the water, right? The water allows for sugars to be dissolved in the phloem sap so that it can be carried up the phloem. Okay, we understand that, right? Perfect. So that's why you've got water as a good solvent and what the biological application of that is. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so the next property that we're going to be discussing about water is the low density of water when it is ice as compared to when it is liquid. So why does that happen? You know, we've always seen icebergs floating on ice, Titanic being sunk by an iceberg that's floating on ice. But have we wondered why that's happening? Why is that iceberg floating? You're like, oh, come on, we've seen ice floating on water for all of our lives. There's nothing special about that. But hang on a minute. If I take, let's say I've got molten gold, okay? And then I've got a brick of gold. If I drop the brick of gold on that molten liquid gold, okay? Brick of gold, top of liquid gold, what will happen? Will you tell me that the solid gold bar will float, or will it drop and sink? You will tell me that it will sink, right? Yet when I say that I've got solid water and I drop it on top of liquid water, it floats. That's weird. Why does that happen? Well, that's one of the nature's exceptions, and we're going to look at why. And to find out why, the best place to always go is the structure. So let's look at the structure, okay? So we've got oxygen, we've got hydrogen, okay? Oxygen, hydrogen, oxygen, hydrogen. We've got, let's have another oxygen here, let's have hydrogen, let's have an oxygen here, hydrogen here, hydrogen here. Okay, perfect. Now let's have some hydrogen bonds. Okay, so hydrogen bonds. So hydrogen bonds here. Hydrogen bond there, we've got a hydrogen bond there. Perfect. So we've got a whole load of hydrogen bonds here. So this is kind of how water looks. But is this when it's a liquid? Well, not really. This perfect geometrical structure is when it is solid. And if you note, right, and look very carefully, in between the structure, you've got massive gaps. You essentially have holes in your structure. And that means you've got a lot of, let's say, empty space in ice. So hence we can say ice has an open lattice structure. ice has an open lattice structure, which means a lot of the ice is actually empty space. Therefore, ice has a low density. Therefore, ice has a low density. Because ice has an open lattice structure, that means a lot of the ice is empty space, and therefore ice has a low density. Perfect. But what about water? What about liquid water? What's going on there? Why does that not have a low density? Okay. Now what's going on? I want you to imagine a bowl of water. Okay, bowl of liquid water. For all of these water molecules, they're running around, they're moving this way, they're moving that way, they're moving everywhere. When they're doing that, they're not in a geometrical structure, right? You've got hydrogen bonds forming, you've got them breaking, forming, breaking, forming, breaking, forming, breaking. It's constant. You don't have a fixed number that you've got 4 hydrogen bonds, right? And you will have no more. It's just happening. It's everything. It's chaos. There's hydrogen bonds everywhere. They're breaking, they're forming. That's going on there, okay? Which means that your molecules aren't as far apart as they are when they're in a geometrical structure, such as when they are as ice. There's no open lattice. Therefore, a lot of that liquid is not in fact empty space when it's in a liquid form. Whereas when it's in ice form, a lot of it is simply empty space. In other words, what does this mean? It means that ice, solid H2O, solid water, has a lower density than liquid water. Why? Because solid H2O has more empty space because of an open lattice structure. Get it? Perfect. Now you're like, yeah, that's fine, but what's the point of this? How does this help biology? We're here to study bio. Well, here's how it helps bio. Let's go with yellow. Right, so what's the benefit? So let's have this ocean, okay? This is a massive ocean. Now, usually, okay, let's just say this is deep like that, okay? So this is a massive ocean. Now, usually, if we didn't have anything floating on top of that, and it gets very cold, this should freeze, right? This freezes, it becomes solid. But wait a sec. We've got Mr. Fishy in here. We've got a lot of fishes. What happens to them? Do they just die? Yeah, if that freezes, they're dead. How are they going to swim? They can't, right? It's not going to work. But that's where you've got ice. Ice comes and saves the day. Because ice, right, can float. Because ice has got a lower density than water, it can float, right? And when, let's say, the temperature drops, a lot of it drops, this top water starts to freeze, right? It starts to become ice. So now you've got a layer of ice forming on top of your water. Now your ice is like a jacket, right? So if I'm standing here and I suddenly open all the windows, right? And it's, let's say, October time or November or whatever, right? It's winter, it's pure winter. I open the windows, I feel cold. What do? I don't sit around. I go and get a jacket. I put another layer of myself. I insulate myself, right? The reason I then get warm is because I've insulated. I've put another layer over myself. The same way, when that ice forms, it forms another layer on top of that water. It's like a jacket, for God's sake, right? It's preventing from this water underneath from freezing. It's insulating it. It's acting as that jacket, right? to prevent it from freezing. And because that jacket prevents it from freezing, Mr. Fishy can live. Brilliant. So why is the property of ice being less dense than liquid water? Because ice floats on the top and then can form an insulative layer which prevents the rest of the water from freezing, and hence allows aquatic organisms to remain living in water even when temperatures are quite low. You're like, come on, surely that can't be the only benefit. You'd be right. There's more benefits. Well, what's the next one? The next benefit is the idea that fishes float, right? If they've got an air bladder, they're able to float. Like, but how does that have any relation to that? Fishes should float anyways. Well, the reason that they're able to float that easily is because when water is a liquid, right? When water is a liquid, it's relatively dense, right? Because we said that the water molecules are rushing all around, they're moving all around high speed. You've got hydrogen bonds forming, hydrogen bonds breaking, right? Because that's happening, right? The water is relatively dense, right? So that means your fishes, if they're just a bit less dense, they're still able to float. And because they're able to float in the water, that means they can live in the water. Brilliant. That's brilliant for our fishes, right? So our fishes are happy. And that's a benefit of water as a liquid being relatively dense and not having an open lattice structure, essentially. But there's more to come. Well, the next benefit is that, I suppose it's the simplest benefit, for God's sake. You've got ice floating on water. You've got solid ice, which is less dense than liquid water. You've got solid ice. What's on the solid ice? You've got polar bears, right? You've got these polar bears here. Yeah, that doesn't look like a polar bear, but imagine that's a polar bear, right? You've got polar bears, you've got different animals having a good time on the ice. Essentially, that's their habitat, right? So the fact that ice can float on top of water, it provides more land habitat to land-living organisms. And that's another benefit of having ice having a lower density than liquid water. So what are the three benefits? First benefit, let's go over quickly. The first benefit of solid ice having a lower density than liquid water is the fact that the solid ice will insulate the rest of the water from freezing. So the rest of the water will not freeze because it's got insulation from the solid ice. The next benefit is that because liquid water is still quite relatively dense, it allows for fishes to float in it quite easily if they're a bit less dense. The final and the most obvious benefit is that the solid ice provides a habitat for land-living organisms to live on through biological benefits. Whew. We've got still, I think, one more to go. Hang on there, yeah? Okay, so the final thing that we need to know about water is the fact that water is incompressible. Now, what does incompressible mean? Well, let's take my water bottle. I've got my water bottle here, and if I try and press from the top and I press from the bottom, right, I can't compress my water bottle. And the fact that I can't compress my water bottle, it means my water bottle is compressible. Incompressible. You cannot compress it. Now let's take a piece of tissue. Okay, let's crumple it up. This is my tissue like this, right? It's tissue paper. You can see it's just tissue paper. Now, if I press from the top, it goes flat, right? It originally was like this. Now I press from the top, flat. It's compressible. So, incompressible, compressible, right? Now, what is incompressible? You cannot compress it. You cannot flatten it. You cannot do that. So what's the benefit? What's the biological benefit of water being incompressible? Well, the first one is something that's very, very interesting. So I'll write it down. So the first benefit is that it allows for a hydrostatic skeleton. It allows for a hydrostatic skeleton to be formed. Now, what's a hydrostatic skeleton? Well, okay, fine. What's a skeleton? For the first thing, a skeleton, you have bones, and that's your skeleton. So it's something that hard that's supporting everything else. In the same way, a hydrostatic skeleton is, instead of bones, you've got water filled in certain compartments inside of an organism, and that water, because it's incompressible, you cannot compress it. Right? When you try and push on it, it will not compress it. It doesn't budge. So it almost acts like a skeleton, a bone, right? And that's why you call it hydro for water, and static because it's not going to budge, and skeleton because it's supporting everything that's on it. It's supporting the organism. And you might be like, okay, that surely isn't true. But you can research into mollusks and annelids, and both use hydrostatic skeletons. So that's the first biological use of water being incompressible. What's the next one? Well, the next one is something we see every day and we just don't think about it. Let's say we've got a plant, right? We've got a garden and we've got a lovely plant growing, okay? We've got this plant growing. Now, suddenly, we've got a storm coming, right? The storm comes, winds blow, the plant doesn't move. It goes a bit like that, goes a bit like that, but it's still there. Why? Why is that? If I take, let's say, a piece of tissue, the same tissue paper, if I blow on it, bends over and it will just fall, right? It will be destroyed. Why is this plant not easily destroyed? It doesn't have bones, come on. But it does have water. It's every cell, right? Every cell, we know that our cells are like this for plants, and we've got our cell wall here. And this contains water here. This water is putting pressure onto these cell walls, right? It's forcing outwards the water, because the water will not compress, because water's still entering into the plant cell, right? Because of osmosis, it's still coming in, but there's nowhere to go, and it tries to push outwards. It's like, I want to get out, right? But your cell was like, that's not happening. And then your water's like, I want to break you. The cell was like, I'm not going to break us up. So what's happening is your cell wall is being pushed outwards, right? It's almost like, let's say you've got, you're in a massive fabric bag, and you're pushing outwards. You've stretched all of that fabric, right? You've pushed outwards, right? In the same way the water's pushing outwards, it's holding that cell wall outwards. It's got a lot of pressure on it. So your plant actually is very firm, right? And it's very straight and rigid. So when the wind blows, it's just going like that, and it's not going to budge, right? It's not soft and floppy that it's just going to fall down. It's not what's happening. You've got a rigid, solid plant. And that's why it's able to survive high winds. So what's the benefit? Okay, let's go over the benefit of water being incompressible. Water being incompressible means that you can have hydrostatic skeletons in things like mollusks or annelids, right? What's the other benefit? Well, the other benefit is, because water is incompressible, when the water, because of osmosis, enters your plant cell, right, and cannot exit your plant cell because of the cell wall, and it cannot be compressed, it pushes outwards. It pushes outwards with a lot of force. And that means your plant is rigid and it's not floppy. And because it's not floppy, it's rigid, it's strong. When the wind comes, boom, it just stays there, rigidly. It doesn't move. It's perfectly fine. So it allows your plant to sustain high winds. So these are all of the different properties of water that you need to know. I know this has been quite long, and you'll find a lot of videos which are much more short, snappy, to the point about water. But with this video, I want you to get an understanding of why things are the way they are. It's all good me telling you that these are the properties of water, and these are the biological uses. But if you're not able to link why it is that this structure allows for this use to occur, right, this application of biology to occur, and why that biology is important, till then you cannot apply your knowledge in exam questions. And this is where students make the fatal error. They'll look at a revision video. Revision videos are for revision, for God's sake. They'll look at a revision video. They will just see the content, memorize it. They come to the exam question. It asks you to apply your understanding. For example, the way I like to think about it, I'll give you a hypothetical question. So you've got an organism. You're designing an organism, and that organism can't have any bones, but you need to provide that organism a skeleton. You're like, wait, but I've never learned about any skeleton except the normal skeleton. What's your answer going to be? Well, your answer is going to be, okay, let me think, right? A skeleton, what's a skeleton? Skeleton needs to support. It needs to be hard. It needs to be tough. It can't be bones. What else could it be, right? Have I come across anything in my course that's related to this? Oh, hang on, I came across hydrostatic skeletons. Can I relate this here? Yes. So you've just solved an exam question because you had good understanding. Biology is all about making links. You want to make link with one concept with another. Keep linking it, keep linking it. When you get an exam question, right, you get a hint from that exam question. You think, okay, that's my hint. But because you've linked everything, right, that hint will link to the answer, right? And it becomes so easy and intuitive. So keep understanding the concept. I know these are long, but please bear with me. We can do this, okay? Really hope that this helped you with your understanding of water for OCR A-Level Biology Spec A. Keep inquisitive, keep learning. Thank you very much.